God aften. Og jeg er rigtig, rigtig glad for at se så mange af jer, som er til stede nu her. Linda er en meget speciel person, som har arbejdet med de 3 principper i ganske lang tid. 30-35 år, tror jeg, det er det hele. Dels klinisk, men også nu her i den senere tid sammen med sin mand, Bill Pettit, som vi har haft fornøjelsen af at have på webinaret her. Og de har så startet nogle forskellige kurser, som de nu kører. Og jeg ved, at Natasha har vist været over og deltage lidt i den der undervisning, der foregår over i Amerika. Jeg mødte Linda for første gang i november måned 2014 i Salt Spring Island, hvor hun var til stede sammen med Bill og Chip og Elsie og kørte kurset. Det er 3-dages kurset, som de kører 2 gange om året i november og i juni. Det var en fantastisk oplevelse, og det er en rigtig, rigtig stor fornøjelse at have Linda med os, simpelthen fordi hun er meget vidende, hun har en stor erfaring, og så er hun et fantastisk sødt menneske. Så med den her lidt korte introduktion vil jeg gerne give ordet videre til Harry, som så står for den egentlige introduktion af det. Er der nogen af jer, som synes, at det går for hurtigt med det engelske, så vif lige med armene, så beder jeg ham lige om at sætte tempoet lidt ned. Men ellers så kører vi derudad. Og er der nogen, der vil sige noget, så vifter op også med armene. Jeg kan se, at I har muted jer selv alle sammen, så det er rigtig udmærket. Det behøver jeg så ikke at gøre. Så nu vil jeg mute mig selv, fordi jeg har en hund, som jeg bliver meget begejstret ind imellem, og det er ikke så godt. Så, men det som vi har overladet ordet, and then I'll pass. This was a very long introduction, but I have so many positive things to say about you, Linda, so it took So I'll now pass on the word to Harry, if you would kindly make the formal English introduction, please.
Okay. Before I introduce Linda, I just want to emphasize, I've talked to her about how the Danish people like to have group discussions, but they're a little slow off the mark sometimes. and I want this. The more you involve yourself in what we're going to have today, the more you're going to enjoy Linda. And to be honest, the more Linda is going to enjoy the talk, because you'll ask her and get involved with it. So I'm asking you, if you have something on your mind or a feeling or a question, to please ask it of Linda, and it gets the ball rolling in a new way rather than just listening to Linda. But she has a lot to offer, but as we all know, the active energy of love pouring out in the moment is the expression that we're looking for. I was sort of famous because she came along in a time when Dr. Bill Pettit his wife had died, and it was a bit of a surprise, I think, to the community. I don't know if this is true, that Linda came in at such a high level, because very often when a strong, wise person meets a partner, there's a sort of a gap. But Linda stepped in a very comfortable, calm way, and was not insecure in any way about sharing what she had felt in her own heart from her own eyes. In other words, she wasn't copying Bill. She was an expression of Linda Pettit, not Bill Pettit. And that was very noticeable in the feeling. And the first time I heard Linda was at the school on Salt Spring. She was talking with Bill Pettit. And what emphasized to me was not only her independent feeling, but the warmth of the woman. She had a tremendous warmth and ordinariness. It was easy to relate to her and so on. And I love warmth. It's something that really means a lot to me. And I could feel that Linda was coming from her heart, not just, she understands the principles and they go like this, and psychologically thought creates a feeling, blah, 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 blah. It was something more genuine than that. And that really touched me. And then the other thing that I would say about the Pettits that really is dear to my heart, because you have to remember, I came from Salt Spring, and it was the spiritual nature of the principles that were the strength of Sid's message, not the psychological. I don't want to separate those two worlds because they're one. But I want to emphasize to you that the spiritual nature of the principles can only be got by people who feel that. They can't just memorize a process and say, oh, and it's spiritual. And so Linda today asked to talk about, her topic is spiritual power, the source of psychological health. I had to read that because I couldn't remember it. And and that is, I guess, my favorite topic about the three principles, about what Sid was expressing, the spiritual nature of the principles and how it applies to us being happy and content here on earth, type of thing. So with that small introduction, as usual, not so small, Linda, go ahead and share some of your thoughts in your head and feelings in your heart. Oh, Bill. Good.
And yeah, I wasn't the least bit nervous about this until I saw that my hubby had shown up. And actually, I'm joking. First of all, thank you, Harry, and thank you, Christian, for those lovely introductions. I couldn't understand a word that Christian said, but I was very aware of listening to the feeling and the feeling of love and warmth and kindness, and just certainty always comes through, doesn't it? Irregardless of the language. So I'm very, very grateful for that. And I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to be here and talk with you today. For me, what I see of the three principles has been a very slow journey. And a couple of days ago, Bill and I went to see a musician named Kathy Mattea in concert. I've liked Kathy for a lot of years. She's a bluegrass singer. And she was talking about how in the last couple of years, she was just finding that she needed some time to sort of pull back and rediscover herself. And so she took 6 months off her touring schedule, and she just played with her voice for 6 months. She was working with her guitarist, Bill Cooley, and they would just play riffs together, and she would experiment with her range in her voice. And she talked about how she just rediscovered that the aging process, but also the spiritually deepening process, was altering what she wanted to express and the music that wanted to come out of her and how it came out of her. And as I listened to that, I thought, that's a really cool thing for me to think about doing, is just to step back and think about my journey of understanding, spiritual understanding, and have a little more consciousness about how it's affected me and what's different. Because sometimes the changes for me have been so little and so incremental that in a way I don't even notice them. And then suddenly I kind of realize that I'm behaving differently and I'm seeing something differently. And that's really cool. And I feel very grateful about that. So I want to talk about that a little bit. When I first before I was introduced to the three principles, I was a therapist and I was working with lots of different people. And I somehow knew that the answer to problems was spiritual. And one of the ways that came through for me is when someone would come in and sit in my office for the first time, and I would look at them and they were carrying the weight of depression, or they were anxious, or maybe they were in a manic, sped up kind of state, that I would sit with them and I would kind of think to myself, Linda, look beyond what you're seeing. Look beyond the physical form. Look beyond the depression. Look beyond the anxiety. Look beyond the distress. What would this individual look like physically if the life force were just coursing through them? And I would watch as their features, now, so this is sort of an imaginary thing, but I would watch as their features got softer, as they looked younger, as the happiness and the smiles just started bursting through them. And I would think to myself, that's who you're talking to, Linda. Remember that. That's who you're talking to, because that's the only thing that's real. So somehow I knew that, but I also would not have had a language to explain to anyone the logic of that. And that's what the three principles had given me. I realize now that I used to believe that we could access a spiritual power behind life and that we could use a spiritual power behind life. But now I think it's true that I see that we are a spiritual power behind life. We are the power that we're looking for. There's no separation between us and it. It's one. And that, as I glimpse that, it gets more and more powerful for me. I was reading, I was actually listening to Sid's Hawaii video, the second one, I think it's called The Oneness of Life. And somewhere in there, he says, we don't have to figure out these principles of mind, thought, and consciousness. We are them in motion. And he uses a particular word. He says, we are shrouded in the three principles. Well, that caught my attention, and I was really curious about that. I thought, that's a strange word to use. We're shrouded in the principles. Wonder what he meant by that. And I thought, I don't think I've ever heard him use that word before. So, as so often happens, a couple of days later, I was opening the missing link, and I read, mental health lies within the consciousness of all human beings, but it is shrouded, and held prisoner by our own erroneous thoughts. And I thought, well, there's that word again, shrouded. What does that mean? And I got really curious, and I went to the dictionary and I looked up shrouded, because I kind of knew what a shroud was. It's a, something that covers something, but I was curious about the original roots of the word. And I discovered that it means two things historically: to conceal and to protect. And so I've been kind of reflecting about that a lot. How do the three principles conceal us, and how do they protect us? And it's been very beautiful for me to consider that because we have the free will to use these powers, these incredible spiritual powers of mind, thought, and consciousness, we actually conceal ourselves from ourselves. We think we are what we think we are, which is really pretty funny, but underneath it, we are what's creating who we think we are. And in that power of creation, there's infinite possibility and there's infinite potential. And that's where our true mental health lies. All mental illness can only be created, all mental distress can only be created from one place. And that is how we are all innocently using the gift of thought moment to moment. And we all do that. It's just part of being alive that we do that. It's nothing terrible. It doesn't make us bad that we innocently misuse it. It's just fact that until we see who we really are and see that we have the power of these principles behind our experience, we're just at risk of making a mess of life. And I've done that. I was thinking about something before I came on that I want to share with you, and it kind of struck me as sweet. I remember after so this is pre-exposure to the principles for me. I remember that after my first husband died suddenly in an automobile accident on Christmas Eve, that I had a tremendous amount of anxiety. I could barely function for a while. And I did use a little medication that I was very grateful that a psychiatrist gave me to help me sleep, because I was so imploded. I felt so afraid. And then about a year and a half after my first husband died, my daughter, who was then 16 and a new driver, was in a really terrible car accident. And thankfully, she was not very injured. She had a couple of minor scrapes but nothing major. But the car was completely crushed. I mean crushed. The only thing that survived the accident was the small driver's cab. And after that happened, I experienced one of the worst episodes of panic attacks that I'd ever had, and I'd struggled with panic all my life. And I couldn't sleep again. And a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, said, you know what you need to do, Linda? You need every night when you go to sleep to ask the 4 guardian angels to guard the posts of your bed. And so I did that. So I would lay in bed and I would be so frightened, and I would think, okay, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, whatever their names were, I can't even remember at this point. I'm asking you to guard the north, south, east, and west corners of my bed, and so that I can go to sleep. And I would go to sleep. I was very comforted by that. Now, I never saw the guardian angels at the corners of my bed, but what I realize now was happening is that I was surrendering my personal thinking. I was just letting go. I was just trusting that there was some force behind and underneath life that would take care of me. And I would feel that power come through me. And it was very calming. I would know that I was safe. As I think about that, I think, it's really funny that what I was really afraid of was that I had confronted 2 things that I think most people are afraid of: the sudden dramatic loss of someone you love dearly. And it happened for me. Someone I loved dearly was gone, and someone I loved very dearly was almost gone. But as I thought about it deeper, I realized that what I was most afraid of was that I wouldn't be able to handle what had already happened, which was really funny because I was already handling it. In other words, I was really afraid of my experience. I was afraid that there could be some experience that would come along that I simply wouldn't be up to handling. And as I thought about that, I thought, gosh, that's at the root of just about every problem that every client has ever brought to me in life. That at some level, they're afraid that they can't handle something, whether it's being socially anxious, whether it's not having the job you think you want, whether it's being confronted with having cancer, whether it's losing a loved one. We get really scared that we can't greet and meet and transcend whatever life puts in front of us. And to me, that's the psychological and spiritual power of the 3 principles, because as we understand them, we begin to see that there's absolutely, and there can never be any truth to that fear, because we are made of that formless spiritual power that has an intelligence beyond anything we can understand analytically. It's a mystery. One of my favorite things that Sid says is, life is a mystery. But as soon as you give up trying to figure it out and you surrender to the fact that it's a mystery, you join the mystery. You join the mystery. You dance with the mystery. And there's power in that. I don't really understand what Sid meant by mind. I didn't glimpse it to the degree that he did, but I know, because I've experienced it, that it is a power that moves me through everything, that I am it. And when I see that I am it, I enjoy incredible capacity to move gracefully and gently through anything that I experience.
Linda, could you talk a little bit about, this is something that a chap talked to me about, a native guy talked to me a couple of days ago, and something I experienced on the last show, which was about suicide in 3P, where this huge feeling of sadness poured into my consciousness. It was very powerful, very beautiful, but confusing, because I was sitting and was sitting with sadness, and how he could deal from that, from the way you were talking about your experience with the car accident and so on. Could you talk a little bit more about that for the people?
I'm not 100% sure that I ask you that what you're asking me to speak to, but I'll try. It sounds like you're saying, can sadness come from any other place but personal thinking?
Yeah, there's sadness from the thinking process, and there's sadness from God. It would be my way of describing it. Sadness from God is a healing, balming energy that makes me aware that I'm a sentient human being, and those feelings are what wake me up to those deeper feelings inside of myself, open me up like that. And the other is a man-made negative emotion.
Yeah, and I think this may be semantic. It may be that we're using different words to describe the same experience. But when I think about sadness, I think of that as something that comes from the personal mind, because it's judging. When I think of the other feeling that I think you're talking about, the word that I use for it is compassion. And compassion is very moving. Very, very moving. And it can, I wonder if sometimes for some people it can almost have that moving quality of it, can have a little bit of a tinge of compassion. When I realized that there was a difference when I was moving through my grief at the loss of my beloved husband, that there were times when I had an extraordinary compassion for myself, and my heart would open up, and I would just know that I was being guided through that experience. And there was an awe in that. There was a wonder in that. And then there were times when I would get a little pissed at life, get a little pissed about what had happened. How dare someone take my husband from me? Why me? Why did I have to go through this? What could I have done to have prevented it? And how can I possibly go on without him? A particular experience comes to mind. It was the day of my husband's funeral. The house was very busy, and people were getting ready to go to the church, and we were all sort of in this state of going in and out of shock about what had happened. And I was standing in my bedroom, and I suddenly saw, and it was as real to me as anything physically that I could see, I saw myself crawl into the casket with my husband and close the lid. And in that moment, I experienced a really deep sadness. There was a sense of, oh my goodness, this is real. He's gone, and who I was with him is gone. My life with him is gone. But right behind that was another feeling And it was really intriguing because it came so quickly, it was so fleeting, but it was like there was a strength. Yes, what you've seen is real. That part of your life is over. But you know what? You're going to sling on your backpack and wander through the wilderness of a new life. And there was an incredible feeling of compassionate strength that came from behind that. And I was moved. I was very deeply moved. So whenever I'm not feeling, this is the beauty of what the three principles have given me. More and more, whenever I'm not feeling that connection to a deeper feeling, it's really beautiful for me to know that I don't have to do anything to get back to that deeper feeling. I just have to turn my consciousness to it. I just have to wait for consciousness to guide me to it, that it's right there. It's always there underneath the surface. Because mental health is always underneath the surface, except when, as Sid says in that beautiful passage, we are shrouding it, literally putting a blanket over it innocently in the way that we're using our personal thinking. I'm not saying there's anything wrong. Please don't hear that I say that there's anything wrong with being sad about the things that we experience in life. In a way, the sadness I felt about my first husband's death was a measure of how attached I felt to him.
And how much you loved him.
And how much I loved him. And I really saw that I accessed that love more deeply when I was in a state of gratitude. And when I was in a state of truly remembering and feeling the love that I am and the love that we had together. And I found that I had a preference for staying in that beautiful place of gratitude. I remember a moment, for example, where I lived in West Virginia in the mountains, and I heated my home with a wood stove. So because in the mountains in West Virginia, you get copperhead snakes. You always put your wood pile way away from the house. You don't stack it real near the house, because when the weather warms up, the snakes like to go where the wood is. So that means when you want to bring the wood over to where the fireplace is, you got to travel a distance. You got to move the wood pile away. Well, Jim had always taken care of that. And now here I was struggling every day to get wood from the wood bin, move it over to the deck, and then move it into the fireplace. And it was a little bit of a distance. And we had probably about 2 feet of snow. So I had to wade through all the snow to get the wood moved around. And I was not a happy camper that day. I was yelling at Jim big time. How dare you leave me? You blankety blank, leaving me behind to have to do this wood moving. What were you thinking? And I was flinging wood around. I was really upset. And all of a sudden, as I'm crying and screaming and really having a good hissy fit, I noticed, I was guided to notice the bird feeder that was hanging at the side of the porch. And I stopped and I watched the birds feed at the feeder, and they were beautiful. There were so many of them. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, that's one thing Jim gave me. He gave me the ability to notice birds. He gave me the joy and wonder of feeding birds. And I was filled with gratitude. And I started crying. It was like, oh my gosh, if he had not been in my life, I wouldn't be having this moment of being fully present to this piece of nature that is just so beautiful to witness. And in that moment, I really saw something. Now, this was before I was introduced to the three principles. But what I really saw was, wow, this is a choice. I can either live in that anger and that upset, and that does not honor Jim's memory in any way. Or I can live in that beautiful feeling of gratitude for the 25 years I had with him. And that not only honors his memory, it keeps it alive. because then I carry forward the feeling that we had together into every moment of my life. I would say right now today that my love for him is bigger than it was. It just fills my heart as I think about him. And yet the heart is big enough that it accommodates unlimited love. So I'm able to go and forward and have this beautiful, loving relationship with my husband. And the three principles understanding really helped me see, oh, in that moment, I was guided to notice something very powerful. I was guided to see that I could either live in my thoughts, which created this nasty sort of experience of anger and upset, or I could live in this beautiful feeling of love and understanding that honored life, that honored who I am, that honored the memory of Jim. And I know that that insight did not come from my analytical mind. It came from the spirit power that I am. It came as a fresh thought. And that's available to us all the time. In big and little circumstances. I would say that knowing that I am creating my experience moment to moment via my thinking is valuable. It's been very valuable. And a lot of times it stops me when I'm in a moment of upset and I think, wait a minute. This is all coming from what I'm doing with my thinking. But the deeper thing for me is knowing that if I have the courage, if I have the humility to just let that thinking go for an instant, that what is underneath that is spirit power. What is underneath that is an understanding and an ability to move through life and a freshness for seeing something that is beyond anything my intellectual mind can come up with.
And that's exactly what Sid Banks had to experience. What Linda just described is exactly Sid Banks's experience when his first wife died. And he felt, I had never seen him so weak, so affected by anything. And he was vulnerable beyond compare. His voice was fragile, but he wasn't pretending. He was just, that was what he was feeling. And this is the last time Sid Banks went to his old friends on Salt Spring. He felt he wanted to be in that feeling where he felt loved and comforted in that feeling. And in his awakening from that, he finally, as his heart freed from this, almost, I guess his heart was he started to, like Linda, realize he had to continue to live, not only without her, but in a whole new world. And then he put out a tape that's from Hawaii, his first tape, and you could hear the fragileness in his voice. It was still, the feeling of it was still very strong, but it brought a whole fresh newness. And like Linda, he then met another woman, and of course, in Linda's case, another man, and that also was extremely beautiful and beneficial. And the truth was that Judy was there in his last years when he was physically very hurting, and she was really supporting him in a way that only she could. So it was a beautiful journey to watch and to feel, but he was not, oh, it's just thought. That was not just thought. That was his wife who in an instant was gone. And to me, that was a big teaching. He did not try to be something. He was still powerful, but he was weak. Yeah.
I love what you just said, that Harry, that I think that's been one of the more recent awarenesses that I've had, is that is just that there's the growing tenderness for my vulnerability as a human being. That the point of the principles is not that we, to me, seeing them is not that we experience perfection, but in fact that we have deeper and deeper compassion for love and understanding for ourselves, because it's that capacity to access the love and understanding for ourselves that always gives us the freshness of a second chance. I give you a really practical example of this, and it's kind of embarrassing to share it, but we were moving into a new house, and we were very busy, and I was very tired and physically not feeling great. It was just demanding. It was a demanding time. And we got a brand new dryer, tumbler dryer. And we paid a lot of money for it because we bought a Cadillac, the best we could buy. And when they installed it, it was squeaking and it was clunking. And I was livid. I was like, how can you pay $1,000 for a dryer and it squeaks and it clunks? So I called and I asked for a serviceman to come and take care of it. And they came, and there was a younger man, an older man. I think the younger man was learning and the older man was in the process of retiring. And I was getting a little edgy, and I was saying, because they were telling me, well, it's eventually going to work itself out. And I got really scared, thinking I was going to get stuck with this clunky dryer. And I said, no, you've got to fix this. You've got to take care of it. And I got a little edgy. And the one service technician said something to me like, well, even the most expensive car like a Bentley is mass produced and it can have problems. And what I heard him doing was telling me that my vantage point, my viewpoint was not important. That's what I heard. It was weird. And I got really triggered. I actually ordered the man out of my house. I said, you leave. And I walked him to the door. And as soon as the door closed, I was horrified. And I thought, oh my goodness, I have just mistreated another human being. Now, you guys probably can't relate to that, but I felt really, really like, oh my gosh, here I know something about these three principles, and yet I've just been very mean. But what I really loved was I went to my office, I sat here for a little while, and I just took a deep breath, and I got a little quiet, and I started to feel compassion for myself. Oh my gosh, hon, you have just been through something very big with this move. You're tired. You haven't been able to really take care of yourself through this process. And in that feeling of love and understanding for myself, I instantly saw, oh my gosh, that man was just trying to tell me to hang in there with what was happening, that he was going to help me out. And it didn't matter that the dryer was more expensive, that any dryer could have a little bit of problem. And I had misheard it. I had misread it from my own state of mind. So I immediately picked up the phone and called the service people at the store and apologized and made it right. Just made it right. And I was so grateful, because that's not something that before the principles I knew in my life. I did not know that if I could find a feeling of love and compassion for myself, a feeling of understanding for myself, a feeling of gratefulness for just the experience of being alive, that I could count on the fact that almost immediately something would come through that would help me figure out how to handle little situations like having a reaction to big situations like moving through the loss of a loved one. That love is totally trustworthy. Love and understanding are totally trustworthy. They are the spiritual power behind life. And the only thing we have to do to access them is to get a little bit of humility, to get a little humble. and to find a beautiful feeling for ourselves, a beautiful feeling of understanding that life is sometimes tough. But that's how the three, remember I said how a shroud is something that conceals and protects? Well, the principles, we innocently use the principles to shroud ourselves from our true nature, but they also protect us. They give us everything we need to make our way through the rough and tumble of life, big and small. By understanding the three principles, we can see that it really is all thought, and that we are alive, we are conscious, and because of that consciousness, we can access this beautiful power of mind, this formless, intelligent, beautiful energy that we are. And whenever we access that, which I think Sid called wisdom, big and little, we find ways to make it through everything.
Meta, how does what Linda's talking about shrouding work? How do you see that in sort of what you're doing with your clients? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Just had to use, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Just had to use my phone since my computer just broke down. So I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, and by the way, hi to your son.
Hi, yeah. This is secret.
What is his name, Meta?
Secret.
Sigwit.
Secret, say, yeah. Oh, Harry, I don't know what to answer because I was really listening, so I had no thought of my own. And I'm not sure I pick up on the language part. I didn't know the word shrouded. And I'm not sure of the word concealed. So I'm left with
Hidden.
Hidden. Okay, so it's like you say, it's hidden and it's protected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nothing comes to my mind right now. I resonate with it, but it's like, oftentimes when you listen to something, it'll come in its own pace. So I'll probably know what to answer tomorrow. Right now, I was just listening to the beautiful feeling and the way you embrace all the variety of the human experience, like when we really feel fragile and out of our own way. So I was just in that experience. But is there anything particular you have in mind, Harry, when you ask?
No.
Then there's two of us. Yeah.
And you have answered you have asked the question anyway and answered it in a beautiful way, Meta.
I did. I didn't know that. That's good. Good.
Does anyone else have a comment or a question or something that they feel moved to share with me? I'm here to learn from you as well.
You know, I think it's. I think it's. I think everybody here, as far as I feel it, is in this very, very calm state of mind that nothing really comes to mind, because it's as if the feeling that we are in really doesn't leave any space for any thinking. And it's really quite beautiful. And it's as if Harry would ask me something, then all of a sudden I would have to flip on my intellectual switch, and then I'll lose my wonderful feeling that I am in the moment, which you have really established very solidly, I think. Yeah. So I think I understand very, very well where Mette is coming from. It's as if we are wallowing in the same soup, and we just don't want to leave that.
When Bill and I went to a concert this week, there was the concert I mentioned earlier. Kathy Mattea sang a beautiful song, and the song was, "We Need a Little Mercy Now." And it's just a beautiful, beautiful rendition written by a woman named Mary Gauthier about how all the world is in need of mercy now. And I was curious, for some reason these days, I'm really curious about language. And I went to the dictionary again. I thought, okay, I know what mercy means, but I want to go read, what is the real root of it? Where does it come from? And it's kind of an interesting, it's a word that it's hard to put words to it. It's like, well, it's about love, and it's about compassion, and it's about forgiveness. But it's really that beautiful feeling, Christian, that you pointed to, or that Mette pointed to. It's that beautiful place of seeing beyond some of the craziness we all create in the form, and of knowing that there is always underneath that deep love and understanding, and from that love and understanding is the potential to make something entirely new. To see something entirely new and to bring it forward. That potential is always there, and that gives me great hope. It brings me to tears as I think about it now, that it doesn't matter if it's the world's big problems, or Denmark's problems, or the United States' problems, or Donald Trump's problems, or the problems of the clients that I work with day to day. Those problems are all things that we've used these beautiful gifts innocently to create. But that's not really where the action is at, noticing all of that. The action is really at knowing that we truly are this beautiful spiritual power that can rewrite everything. And the other thing that comes to mind right this minute is that at the same time, it's important to me not to be irritated or upset with myself because I'm constantly remembering that and then not remembering that. I love it that in the Quest for the Pearl book, Sid Banks makes the point that it's the daily sweeping away of the irritations. It's the daily dropping of the thought. It's the daily remembering who we are, that we have to, it's just part of life that we have to do over and over again. It's the dailiness, the ordinariness of that. It's the appreciation of the fragileness of the human experience and the vulnerability of the human experience, and the willingness and the courage to know that, to look, that there's something underneath that gradually creates the pearl that we're looking for. And what is the pearl? That we start noticing little by little that, wow, I'm not so afraid anymore. We're not so anxious anymore. We're not so sad anymore. We're more open to life. We're more present to life. I notice the birds a whole lot more. I appreciate the sunshine a whole lot more. I see the love inside my husband a whole lot more. I remember more that he's not my enemy, he's my friend. It's that dailiness, the ordinariness of that, and the willingness to just sort of look deeper that rewards us in the end with a much, much nicer life.
But don't you think that mercy comes into the picture in the moments where we forget that we are all that, and we fall into the trap of being entirely human?
Yeah.
That's where we really need the mercy, isn't it? Because that's really where we are embracing ourselves as a human being that we also are.
Yeah. That's that, you know, as you say that, what comes to mind immediately, Christian, is that's when I think and I see people I work with, and sometimes they do it a lot faster than me, really start to see very deeply into the principles. And really meet that love and understanding that we are.
Yeah.
Sid always emphasized the ordinariness of who we are. And even to this day, I must admit, it is something that I'm only growing to understand rather than understand. But I can tell you that in the ordinariness is where all the power is. Because you have to empty out, you know, what Linda's doing now, or Bill or myself and all the others. When you share the principles, it's a very pure reality. And then I feel I have to empty out. And the only way I know how to empty out is to be ordinary. Garden, talk to people. And I go, oh, I can just be Harry. Not Mr. Harry. And I'm just much more comfortable with that. It's freeing of image. Could you talk a little bit more about being ordinary?
Can I say something?
Please.
When we're talking about ordinariness, what came to my mind was talking to that thing about how our innate powers are shrouded. That in a way, what I see in my clients is that oftentimes our wisdom is so ordinary to us that we don't see it. I see again and again people's wisdom talking to them, but they didn't even realize it because it's so ordinary to them. Like today, I was talking to someone who had been searching for 3 years for something to help her get over her stress, and that was quite a stressful search. So some time ago, she felt sick and tired of that search. And to me, it was so obvious that was her wisdom. But it was just a thing that happened to her, so she didn't see it as wisdom. But it did help her look in another direction. And I think one thing that can really help us to start to realize the principles is to start to see how it's everywhere.
I loved what you just said, Metta, and it reminded me when I was in clinical practice that I loved that moment when I was doing therapy with someone where I would say to them, okay, so I want to be clear that I heard your story. and that I've got it. And I would give back to them sort of what I've heard. And I would wait until I got that, yeah, you've got it, you understood me. And then I would say, but here's what I also heard underneath your story. Here's what you told me about how beautiful you are. And then I would share with them how I had heard wisdom and love coming through. And inevitably, I would say 98% of the time, the client, after I'd done that, would be sitting there saying, I said that? You saw that? It's, as you said, there was just so much taking it for granted or just not noticing it, just not seeing it, and suddenly having it brought to consciousness, to the level of being conscious about it, would wake up hope and kind of take people to a place where they start looking at their own history through new eyes, seeing that they were never ever broken in the first place, and that evidence of their unbrokenness, their connection to mind, had been coming through constantly. They just weren't paying attention. I love that. And I'm aware, I think that we're close to being out of time, so I want to respect that boundary.
Well, there's no finish line, actually. There'll be an obvious finish line. Yeah, so just...
I'm seeing a lot of beautiful, thoughtful faces.
But I think that with the feel that is in the room right now, wouldn't you suggest that this, or wouldn't you think that that's a perfect note to finish the talk? Because everybody is, as far as I can see here, in that feeling. I think it's wonderful. And if I should say something to disturb that feeling, then it would be to thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. I think it has been a wonderful session with you, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. And I look back with fondness on November 14, when we spent some time together in Salisbury Island, and I'm really, really happy to see you here in this in these settings right at this moment here. So I can't tell you enough how happy we are to have you here, and I think I'm running out of superlatives. So
it's always a good place to stop.
so this is where I think, Harry, that we should call it off and say good night to everybody.
That sounds fine.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for showing up here. I think it has been a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye bye, Bill.
Bye bye.
Christian? Christian?
Ja?
Jeg skal bare lige høre dig. Hvad hedder det? Der var jeg kan ikke